Hey! All right, we are going to look at graphing relationships. So we've talked a lot about writing functions, how to evaluate functions. We've done a little bit with graphing, but not really a whole lot. Now, this lesson, as well as the lesson tomorrow, is all about graphing. This first one's going to be a little bit more focused on discrete versus continuous graphs, which I've hinted to already. Our next lesson is going to be about creating actual graphs using t-charts and actually like graphing them. So what I like about functions for the most part is it's a bunch of points that have a relationship with each other. So graphing these relationships, these ones today will have a purpose, like they will have an underlying meaning. In this case, we have the temperature. So they all sort of tell a story. Does that make sense? So here's our story. The air temperature was constant for several hours at the beginning of the day and then rose steadily for several hours. It stayed the same temperature for most of the day before dropping sharply at sundown. So we now need to look at these three graphs and decide which one really tells the story of this situation. So when I look at this situation, I like to decode it a little bit. So I want you to think about what words in here are going to help you figure out what aspects of the graph to focus on. So looking at this, the air temperature was constant for several hours. Constant for several hours tells me that there's going to be no change. No change is typically seen in a horizontal line. There's no change. You could also see that in terms of a vertical line if you're being thoughtful about how that's being described, but usually a constant for several hours would be seen as a horizontal line. So constant for several hours at the beginning of the day. And then it rose steadily. So that tells me that there is going to be a consistent increase. I don't want to see like a curve to anything, and I don't want to see it be variable at all. I want to see it like have a steady increase. So I want to see rose steadily tells me I'm going to have a steady increase. So there won't be any bumps or jags in that sort of like consistent increase in the positive direction. It stayed the same temperature for most of the day before dropping sharply at sundown. So it stayed the same temperature. Again, I'm going to see a horizontal line here. It's staying the same temperature. Nothing's changing. It's not getting hotter. It's not getting colder, that sort of thing. For most of the day before dropping sharply at sundown. So I want to see a really drastic downturn. Drastic downturn. So let's now look at these sort of decoded terms and say like, okay, what of these graphs helps us see that? So we have a constant for several hours. That's kind of constant for several hours. So that one's good. This is kind of constant for several hours. But this one, I don't see any constant. I see a rising steadily and actually probably pretty steeply. So I'm going to eliminate this graph entirely right off the get-go. It's not constant for several hours. So I'm looking at these two now. Then it rose steadily for several hours. So it's rising steadily. Okay, rising steadily. I'm seeing rising steadily in both of them. Okay. It stayed the same temperature for most of the day. Stayed the same temperature for most of the day. That means I need to see another horizontal. So both of these have the constant to begin with, and then it's rising steadily, and then stayed the same temperature for several hours. This one does not do that. It's not staying the same temperature for several hours. It is pretty much hitting that peak temperature and then decreasing right away. This one, however, staying the same for several hours. So this is that same high temperature of the day for several hours. And then it drops sharply at sundown. So my graph right here is this middle graph. You're going to be doing the same thing with some verbal descriptions. Your job is going to be to decode them and then identify which graphs work best. And you'll also need to be able to decode things and create the actual graph. So that's your first little mini lesson. I have a couple more left for this unit or for this lesson, and then you'll be off to work on your must-do problems. Just hang on for the next one. Bye.